Good morning. I just want to start by saying how incredible it is to be here this morning, to hear from those such inspirational speakers already, and not quite sure how we follow those this morning, but also to be on a panel with such incredible women who are doing such inspirational work daily. And I don't want to start too much on the negative, but I think one of the first questions that we really need to acknowledge is, although we know that this is a really serious, pressing issue, we know that ending violence against women is something that we all agree is very important, there are still obstacles and there are still barriers that we face. So I just want to start by asking, what do you think those obstacles are? Because we have many frameworks and policies already on paper that are there to protect women. However, we know that accountability and the cultural change quite often lags behind those legislations and laws. So first to Graziella, obviously your work a lot of the time is in conflict-affected states or transitional states. Can I ask you which systemic barriers you think hinders progress at the moment to end violence against women?
Thank you, Karen, for the question. It's very complicated to answer in a few minutes, but I will try to focus perhaps on a few things that I've seen across the countries where I worked since 1999. First of all, societal issues. Somebody already mentioned today several times. Sexism is deeply rooted in all societies, both in public and in private spaces. Silencing women who try to speak out is the main issue that I've seen all over the countries where I worked. Women, for example, when I worked in Tajikistan for 4 years, every time that women wanted to talk about domestic violence were considered family destroyers. Those that wanted to talk about rape were stigmatized by their own society, by their own families, were marginalized. And those that tried to talk about sexual harassment at work, they are considered troublemakers. And how difficult it is to report sexual harassment when perhaps the harasser is your supervisor. So women are systematically silenced. And then we think about, the judiciary. I worked for the UN, I worked for the OSCE with government and civil society on programs to train judiciaries, law enforcement officers. Yet the work that we do is really a small drop in the ocean. And the type of training that we are allowed to do, they are just very short. And it's very difficult to change the mind and the institutions which are gendered, because the same people that work in these institutions are the people that are part of our societies. So it's extremely difficult to make changes with a very few money. And here I go back to the third issue, financing. Resources are very limited. When I was working, I worked for 12 years in field missions as a staff, and then now as a consultant, always for the UN, the EU. And the money that is allocated for violence against women is always extremely insufficient. It's project-based, which means that funds are allocated for 1-year project, for 6-month project. But when the project is over, what is going to happen? We can never cover all the people that we like to cover, because the money is insufficient.
Yeah, it's something that I see in my work all the time, just such a limited pool of funding and resource for this work, which is so critical. Thank you. I'd like to ask Anne-Laure now, the work that's happening at L'Oréal. Obviously, many companies run awareness campaigns around violence against women. But how can we move beyond awareness to real accountability? And could you explain how L'Oréal has been helping to do that recently?
Merci beaucoup. Moi, je vais continuer en français parce que je suis plus à l'aise et le sujet est tellement important que je préfère me sentir à l'aise. C'est une excellente question et c'est un point qui est crucial. Comment on passe de la sensibilisation, comment on passe de la prévention à l'action? Pour commencer, j'ai envie de dire, il faut prévenir. Il faut les prévenir, ces violences. Et pour prévenir les violences, il faut travailler sur le sexisme parce que le sexisme est à la base des violences. Et c'est pour ça que on travaille souvent ensemble en France et même à l'étranger. On a créé un collectif qui s'appelle Stop au sexisme. Je fais un petit clin d'œil à AXA parce que AXA travaille main dans la main avec nous comme 300 organisations. Et c'est des actions qui sont concrètes. Par exemple, sur l'année 2024, c'est 1400 actions qui ont été menées en France pour lutter contre le sexisme. C'est 46 000 personnes formées pour lutter contre ce sexisme parce qu'on sait que si on arrive à éradiquer le sexisme, on arrive à retirer cette base de la violence. Le deuxième point, pour passer de la sensibilisation à l'action, pour moi, c'est essentiel d'afficher partout une tolérance zéro. Et c'est vraiment ce qu'on essaye de faire au sein du groupe L'Oréal, afficher cette tolérance zéro et prendre ce sujet à tous les niveaux de l'entreprise. Et j'ai bien dit à tous les niveaux et au plus haut niveau aussi. Et c'est pour ça que ce qui est important pour afficher cette tolérance zéro, tous les ans, une fois par an, aux plus de 80 000 collaborateurs de notre groupe, notre directeur des relations humaines et notre directrice de l'éthique font un mail pour expliquer toutes les remontées qu'on a pu avoir via notre ligne qui s'appelle Speak Up, pour faire remonter ces situations de harcèlement, de violence et autres, et expliquent le nombre de sanctions qu'il y a eu, parce que la sanction est essentielle, avec toujours cette affirmation de la tolérance zéro. Troisièmement, passer à l'action, c'est mettre des actions qui sont concrètes. Il faut pouvoir concrètement aider les victimes de manière extrêmement rapide avec des mesures très très fortes comme le soutien psychologique, le relogement d'urgence, un téléphone sécurisé, des places de parking. Donc ça passe par des actions concrètes. Et je terminerai parce qu'également essentiel pour moi, c'est la mesure. Il est essentiel de mesurer nos actions pour voir si elles fonctionnent comme on le veut, pour voir s'il y a un besoin de les ajuster. Et ça, c'est important de toujours se remettre en question. Et c'est toutes ces actions concrètes qui vont créer une culture d'entreprise où les violences n'ont pas leur place.
Merci, thank you so much. To Hélène now, as Deputy Mayor of Paris, you've recently represented Paris in London at the first International Summit of Feminist Cities, something that I'm really interested and inspired by, this global collective that we're trying to make change by sharing best practice. Could you tell us a little bit about how best practice is shared globally for a move towards designing cities for women?
Tout à fait. Excusez-moi, je continue aussi en français. D'abord, je veux remercier le Women's Forum, évidemment, et puis nous sommes à quelques jours du 25 novembre, la journée internationale de lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes. Et c'est vrai que moi, ma première action comme adjointe à la maire de Paris sur l'égalité femmes-hommes, ça a été de mettre en place un observatoire parisien des violences faites aux femmes qui permet d'avoir les différentes institutions, la santé, les différents représentants de l'État, la préfecture de police et toutes les associations qui sont spécialistes et qui vont nous aider à lutter contre les violences faites aux femmes. Et je sais qu'il y a dans la salle le collectif féministe contre le viol, elles imaginent, les associations qui ont les compétences vraiment. Donc la première chose, c'était de travailler par et pour les Parisiennes. Mais nous sommes dans un moment historique très important. Moi, j'ai eu la chance d'être en responsabilité avant MeToo, mais aussi de connaître la révolution MeToo. Et je veux dire et redire à quel point il s'est passé quelque chose en 2017 avec MeToo, et ça a continué à travers le monde. Et cette exigence de lutte contre les violences va bien au-delà de la lutte contre les violences. Elle nous permet aussi d'exiger l'égalité réelle en droit. Pour le droit à l'IVG, à l'avortement, à l'abortion, j'allais dire, voilà, je sais pas, je cherche le mot le plus facile, pour le droit à l'avortement, pour l'égalité salariale et professionnelle. De cette lutte contre les violences découlent nos revendications pour l'égalité. Or, aujourd'hui, on voit que dans le monde, il y a une tentation, une progression des régimes autoritaires, des régimes autocrates. C'est pas moi qui le dis, c'est le 5-Dem Institute de Göteborg en Suède, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a une vraiment tendance à l'autoritarisme. Cette remise en cause des démocraties s'accompagne d'un discours masculiniste de lutte contre les féministes, de lutte contre l'égalité, de revendication des violences envers les femmes et les hommes. Et donc plus que jamais, parce que MeToo nous a permis de comprendre l'interconnexion de nos luttes internationales, on a aussi besoin de se connecter. Et entre villes, c'est très intéressant parce que nous sommes sur le terrain, directement en lien avec les associations qui accompagnent les femmes victimes de violences. Moi, je peux vous dire, à Paris, nous accompagnons 17 600 femmes précisément. Nous savons dans quels services sociaux elles sont accompagnées. On a les chiffres, on a les associations, on a les services publics, on a le lien avec des acteurs concrets et on expérimente des choses comme peut-être vous connaissez le violentomètre que nous avons créé avec la ville de Paris et l'Observatoire de Seine-Saint-Denis. Et ce violentomètre, aujourd'hui, on l'a traduit dans 20 langues. Et on va discuter, par exemple, avec Sadiq Khan à Londres, qui a un vrai discours aussi féministe et de lutte contre les violences, et échanger les bonnes pratiques entre villes. Donc on a créé le réseau Change contre les violences faites aux femmes, où il y a 25 villes. On n'a pas envie d'être un réseau qui multiplie le nombre de villes. Pour ça, on veut être un réseau de travail, donc avec peu de villes. Mais je peux vous dire qu'une des premières choses que je fais en partant tout à l'heure, c'est probablement d'écrire à la ville de New York pour leur proposer de rejoindre le réseau Change contre les violences faites aux femmes, parce que de ces bonnes pratiques où on va fédérer les acteurs économiques, institutionnels et les associations, on peut réellement progresser et se dire on peut en finir avec les violences faites aux femmes et lutter contre l'idéologie dont vous avez parlé, l'idéologie sexiste qui est promue par les pouvoirs autoritaires.
Merci, thank you. We have some very exciting news from Karima that's being announced during this panel, so it's really exciting to be here for the launch of AXA's Safe Spaces platform. And Safe Spaces is something really integral to my work, making sure that women do have a safe space, which quite often is neglected in terms of online or in the physical presence. Could you tell us a little bit about AXA's Safe Spaces platform and how this reflects a courageous shift in corporate culture?
Thanks, Karen. The voice that I would like to bring to this conversation, because I'm in front of colleagues who are business leaders, is as well to strongly advocate for all what we can do as business leaders to fight against domestic violence, to fight against sexual abuse. Because in our respective companies we can do a lot, we have an impact on society, communities, and through our products, our services, or what we can do as an employer, we can impact a lot of lives. So that's the voice that I'd like to bring, and that's exactly about this initiative. So where we come from and why this initiative, we have been committed now for more than 15 years supporting women impacted by domestic violence or sexual violence in many countries, especially in France through a program called Hells Angels, where we have people, lawyers, dedicated to support women impacted by violence. And those past 15 years, we've supported nearly 2,600 women. And we've learned from that, from the discussions as well with NGOs, etc. And we have as well a global policy to protect our people, our employees. And through that, what we understood is that this thing around awareness and understanding what we are talking about when you talk about coercive control, financial abuse. Very often you have around you people who may be in those situations but who will not recognize the signals, or if they talk to you about this, you may not absolutely understand what's going on or being in capacity to help them. So because we have implemented a global policy a few years back, because we have trained, we are present in 51 countries. And so we have trained people in our HR teams to be able to support those impacted by domestic and sexual violence. We've learned that, in fact, you need to train individuals to be able to understand what's going on. So this is about this platform. So it's a website. It will be freely available to everyone. We will be launching it today. It will be in 12 languages. And the intent is really through this platform you can access to basically testimonies, material, short videos that explain situations of violence, such as coercive control, as I mentioned, financial abuse, and we are an insurer. So like bankers and insurers, we are quite close to listen and to understand those situations. You have, of course, physical assault as well, and other dimensions that are covered. And for each of those dimensions, we have worked with specialists, with NGOs to really explain what these situations are, just to enable each one of you, each person in every company and in society in general to better understand what's going on. And we have been joined in the launch of this platform by L'Oréal, by LVMH, by ENGIE, by Accor, by Orange, by Publicis. And honestly, everyone in this room, or whatever company, whatever the size of the company, I would really encourage you in general to train your people, because, and beyond training, to share the message internally that you care as an employer, that you are ready to listen to people, that you encourage people to break the silence, because they are not alone. And I think as an employer, we have a duty to really convey that message.
Absolutely. It's so important that we start the conversation and we give people the space to have that conversation. And I know a piece of research that I read recently suggested that a colleague is actually the first person that someone will disclose domestic abuse to after the emergency services. We spend a lot of time with the people we work with, and just having that ability to speak freely about this subject is so important after such many, many decades of silence around this topic, and still it being a taboo in normal conversation. And my final question, because I know we're trying desperately to keep to time here, is I have very personal experience, as I'm sure every woman does, of the impact of backlash and the negativity that you receive when you speak about these issues. I mean, personally, I've had to have police involvement in some of the threats that I've received. And this is just about talking about ending violence against women, which shouldn't be a difficult topic. It shouldn't be a controversial topic. So, Graziella, to you first. How can we better support local actors, especially women leaders, in who are always taking personal risks to speak up? And what do women face when we are talking about gender-based violence, particularly online?
Thank you, Karen, for this very important question. I mean, you talk about, I mean, we talked today already about, different forms of violence, and clearly personal attacks, harassment, and online can actually lead women to also loss of job opportunities, self-censorship, and we know that these threats also are like life threats, but also what is interesting to see is that the majority of the threats made to women are sexualized. There are, threats of rape, torture, and when we talk about it, today we talked also about, how important is technology, but also we have to think how technology is facilitating violence against women and the importance to regulate it. Yeah, because when we have technology used in an improper way, this can actually amplify violence very quickly and actually discourage women from taking steps to fight against violence against women. In 2023, for example, I was in Iraq. I was conducting a gender audit for the European Union delegation there, and I met with several human rights defenders. And I went to Kurdistan and also in Baghdad interviewing women's rights activists. And all of them told me about the severe attacks that they were, receiving, and yet they chose to continue working, on violence against women. But the thing that they told me that also caught my attention is that not only we are attacked and there is the risk for us, but the women who are survivors of violence against women are afraid to come to us. So it means that these centers that already exist, that are funded by the European Union, cannot function properly because of these online attacks and because survivors fear to go to the centers because they may also be targeted by extremist groups. Perhaps what is really interesting to know today, and I guess many of you already know, that there are more and more, legal instruments to actually control this type of violence online. And for example, there is the Council of Europe framework on artificial intelligence, which was adopted last year and is open for signature. There are already 16 countries that have ratified it. Ukraine is one of those countries. I say Ukraine because I work on Ukraine currently. And it's really important to know that there are these legal frameworks. But there is also, for example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is a globally ratified convention, and we have to think also how to implement better this convention. And then the Istanbul Convention, the Council of Europe Convention on Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. This is something that has received a lot of backlashes. Just very recently, Latvia withdrew from the Council of Europe Convention, and this is the only legally binding instrument that exists at the moment to combat violence against women and cyber violence.
Thank you. You're right. There is already legislation there. We need to use it properly. Yeah. Karima, to you, when it comes to speaking about that issue in the workplace, are there any particular policies or frameworks that you would use to protect women who are working within organisations?
As I mentioned, what was key for us was first to strongly communicate on the fact that this is an issue that we care about in the workplace, because I think this matters. But once you've said that, it's not sufficient, because you need to create the trust. It's not easy for somebody who is a victim, and we all know it, to go and speak, because people have fear to be stigmatized. So you need to build that trust where people can come and speak to somebody who is trained and can welcome what is being said. And so that's why we invested heavily in training what we call trusted partners in each and every entity. And once again, we are present in more than 50 countries. So we had, for this training, to take into account local specificity, and our global policy is covering domestic violence, sexual violence, and intra-family violence. So you can imagine all the dimensions it covers when you're present across 51 countries. And you choose, and the key for us was to choose in each of our entities somebody who is established enough in the entity to build that trust with people who would come and say, look, I am in that situation. And I'm very happy, because we follow across our entities the number of individuals that we impact. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15, 20, these are lives that you impact. So I think that, once again, in our companies, whatever the sector, those situations exist. And by partnering together, by partnering with NGOs, we can help people break the silence. And the other piece is really around relocation and housing. And that's why we made that move in our business to propose immediate housing, immediate relocation, because we know that people don't leave their abuser because they don't know where to go. And there are other dimensions that we can cover as corporates, which are employment, etc. So I think being very concrete, looking at those issues very concretely in each one of our corporates, and working on culture and working on systems and what we can provide is really the way to go.
Thank you so much. And I think you're right. It's about making sure that we're treating women as in a holistic sense, because we all know that violence against women starts young. It is a continuum that exists throughout our lives. So the final question to Anne-Laure and to Hélène would be, considering the global scale and the continuum of violence against women and girls, beginning in girlhood, how can we ensure we're tackling the root causes of this within our initiatives?
On a un vrai rôle à jouer, on a un vrai rôle sociétal à jouer en tant qu'entreprise, et le groupe L'Oréal a des marques, et en tant que marque, on a un rôle extrêmement important à jouer pour éclairer la société, pour accompagner la société. J'aimerais vous parler d'un programme qui me tient particulièrement à cœur, qui a pour moi a vraiment changé ma façon d'agir. C'est le programme de notre marque L'Oréal Paris, qui s'appelle un programme de formation qui a été créé avec l'association Whybro, qui s'appelle Stand Up. Stand Up, c'est un programme de formation sur la base des 5D. Stand Up de L'Oréal Paris, c'est une formation pour lutter contre le harcèlement de rue. Je ne sais pas si vous savez, mais dans le monde, 80% des femmes sont victimes de harcèlement de rue. C'est impensable. C'est totalement impensable, et il faut vraiment, vraiment que ça s'arrête, et il était nécessaire de travailler dessus. Et cette formation sur la base des 5D, je le répète, un stand-up, parce que si certains n'ont pas suivi la formation, je vous invite à la suivre. C'est une formation très simple pour apprendre en tant que victime ou en tant que témoin, et les témoins ont un vrai rôle à jouer, comment je peux réagir pour rompre cette relation de harcèlement sans se mettre en danger. Et vraiment, j'insiste parce que c'est vraiment important de pouvoir la suivre. C'est aujourd'hui une formation qui est déployée dans 46 pays. Plus de 4 millions de personnes ont été formées et on voit les résultats. Donc vraiment, encore une fois, c'est agir sans se mettre en danger. Et puis, j'aimerais faire un petit clin d'œil sur deux sujets que la marque L'Oréal Paris a fait. Le premier, c'est au printemps dernier, en France, ils ont lancé le prix Forbes 50 over 50. Et je pense qu'on a un vrai rôle à jouer où la jeunesse est très représentée dans nos pays. Je pense que ce qui est important, c'est d'être inclusif et d'être inclusif à tous les âges. Et on parle souvent de confiance, d'empowerment, et ça, c'est à tous les âges. Et donc, merci à cette marque d'avoir mis les femmes de plus de 50 ans sous les projecteurs. Je pense que c'est vraiment essentiel. Et puis, un dernier clin d'œil, c'est celui du défilé de L'Oréal Paris qui a lieu tous les ans à la Fashion Week. C'est un défilé qui prône toutes les diversités, toutes les beautés, toutes les femmes. Et je crois que dans la confiance qu'on peut avoir en nous, dans la place, dans notre rôle à jouer, c'est essentiel.
D'abord, ce que je veux dire, c'est que s'il y a un backlash, une réaction, c'est parce que derrière, on gagne des choses. On était en train d'avancer. Donc, il ne faut pas avoir peur de ce backlash. Ceux qui organisent le backlash, c'est ceux qui ont peur. Donc nous, il faut qu'on continue à porter l'égalité, la lutte contre les violences et qu'on le porte toujours plus collectivement, les institutions, les associations et les entreprises. Ensuite, il y a en effet une priorité pour moi, c'est les générations X, Alpha, les jeunes. Il faut aller les aider parce qu'ils sont très sensibles sur la question de la lutte contre les violences. Mais beaucoup d'entre eux sont aussi victimes. Il y a beaucoup d'enfants victimes de violences. Il faut pouvoir agir sur ça et il faut pouvoir prévenir toujours plus. Or, nous, on fait beaucoup de choses en tant que ville, avec les associations, avec les institutions. On fait beaucoup de choses pour les jeunes, mais nous ne pouvons pas agir seuls sur la question des réseaux sociaux. Et le backlash, il s'organise beaucoup par les paroles et les mots et il va cibler les jeunes sur les réseaux sociaux. Les algorithmes organisent la violence et ciblent les jeunes. Les jeunes sont le produit. Et donc sur ça, il faut qu'on puisse agir beaucoup plus collectivement, qu'on ait des cadres juridiques beaucoup plus contraignants, qu'on ait des financements aussi, parce qu'aujourd'hui, c'est une jungle masculiniste qui va chercher les enfants pour les amener à être plus violents. Mais il y a le fait que le backlash, il est politique, il ne tombe pas du ciel, il y a une volonté politique de backlash. Mais il y a aussi le fait que certains fassent un business de ce backlash. Et sur ça, nous sommes très en colère. Vous avez peut-être vu à Paris la marque Chine s'installer alors qu'elle vend en ligne des poupées pédocriminelles. Ça, nous sommes très en colère du fait que certains veuillent faire un business avec le backlash. C'est pour nous inadmissible. Et on veut au contraire que toutes les entreprises s'engagent dans la lutte contre les violences sexistes et sexuelles, dans la lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes. Aussi, comme employeur, on peut accompagner des salariés qui sont victimes de violences conjugales. Et on veut au contraire que les violences faites aux enfants, les violences faites aux femmes ne puissent pas être un business à aucun moment, nulle part dans le monde. Et ça, je pense qu'on doit agir collectivement et qu'il faut que les institutions puissent aussi agir, mais les entreprises aussi, pour que ça ne puisse plus exister. Donc, il n'y a plus qu'à faire, mais je crois que le progrès est possible.
Merci. I think it's very clear from all of these conversations that it's so important that this is a collective effort, right? Everybody within our own roles as human beings, members of society, community leaders, organisation leaders, parents, we all have a role to play. And I hope that's the message from the panel, that we all do very different work in different ways, but we really are just trying to build connections between people and open this very, very important conversation. So thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you, Graziella, Karima, Anne-Laure and Hélène.
And thank you.